Greetings and salutations. Ben here. Welcome to the Sunday night hanging right here on Sundays. Ironically enough, right here on the YouTubes. If you're new, please subscribe. And if you're returning, welcome back. Tonight we have a very special guest. He's an expert on certain things, and he knows a bit about a lot of other things. I'm just saying. I've been talking with Steve here backstage, and heck of a guy. And so welcome, Steve, and welcome to all the chat here. This is going to be fun. We've got Hit Metal Works, Ferd Burfel, iRock Zed Blues, Keith Campbell, Paul McNary, Thomas Santiago. Survived the snowstorm in Buffalo. Good to see you. You're alive. That's good. Octopus Ears is here. BC Rich 581, AQ Music 10, Guitar Man 45. Of course, Holly Lewis. Thank you so much, Holly, for pointing Steve in this fella's direction. I really appreciate that. It's great to see you here. Stephen Douglas made it. Michael Krause. Who else do we have in here? LRM Guitars, Jason Lindholm, Martin Lemaire, Blackjack Guitar. Unfucking believable. That's right. Yeah, we're good. We're 2 minutes in. Lawrence Cash, Symmetry is here. Billy Baloney, Dennis Ellis, Josh Tamberg, Superfan Gary Davlin, Herb of Fireside Studio. Nice. Let's go down to the bottom here. Dan of New Jersey. Yep. Awesome. ET 5150. Brother Aaron from Albus Band. Last week's guest. Great to see you. And many others rolling in. So there's Sandra. Good to see Sandra. Awesome. Terry's 3Gs is in here. I must have missed Terry, but everybody's saying hey to Terry. So Terry must be in here. Oh, there he is with all the links and everything. Thank you, Terry. Links to Steve's social media stuff. Thank you very much. Awesome. Check it out, folks. If you're not following them already, do it. Just don't even think about it. Just do it. Taylor 315, Jeff K. Awesome. So you have, I think, out on the market, possibly the definitive book on at least a portion of Mr. Edward Van Halen's career. Yeah. Which personally, that's my favorite part. The tinkering, and before it got too corporate and it's an entity, as we know in today's landscape, a lot of these bands now, they employ dozens of people, and it's a corporate thing as much as anything else. But you happen to know this, you met this guitar picker out of Pasadena.
Yeah.
Why don't we start at the start? How did you meet Mr. Van Halen for the first time? And thank you very much.
Man. I met this guitar picker from Pasadena on one obscure June night in 1977. I thought I'd head over to the Whiskey. I was living up in the Hollywood Hills at the time, and for those who've read the book, know I was living on a street called Weepaw Way, which is basically just up the hill from the Sunset Strip and the Whiskey. So I was at the Whiskey a lot, and in fact, I was there so much that though by 77, I'd probably been writing for about 4 years, but I'd been there so many times. It was like, honestly, to get me out to the Whiskey, it had to be something cool, because at that point, labels really curried favor with writers, and they were sending out invitations to all their bands, and you had these open tabs, and I was never really a drinker, but you had open tabs, and sometimes they serve you food. Anyway, so to go to the Whiskey, it's like it had to be somebody special. So on that particular night, Cheap Trick was playing they were recording for a live record. This is before Budokan. This is before they blew up. And I thought, wow, that's worth seeing. I mean, I was a Cheap Trick fan. So I was there, went there with my brother, drove over there, parked, went inside, and we're sitting there just kind of standing around downstairs. And somebody comes up behind me and taps me, and I turn around, and it's my good friend, Michelle Meyer. Michelle was the booker for the Whiskey. She also booked a lot of clubs around Hollywood and around town. At that time, the punk thing was really big. So there was a couple clubs called Madame Wong's East and Madame Wong's West, which figured pretty prominently in the punk thing. I mean, those are pretty heavy clubs. Punk bands, that weren't signed, they were playing these clubs. They were getting a lot of visibility. So I don't know how it happened. I just befriended Michelle. I just thought she was fantastic. she loved nothing more than to turn people on to music, and it was just in her blood. And I don't know, she and I became sort of, buddies of a sort. So, and she knew that I was writing for the guitar mags, that I was this guitar geek guy, and I was always looking for new guitar players and what's cool and this and that. And so she tasked me. She says, "Listen, there's somebody you got to meet, man. He's upstairs. He's Godhead." And in the book, I also talk about her unique kind of lexicon. Godhead for Michelle was superhuman human beings. These were guys beyond, very good guitar players. These were extraordinary guitar players. So Michelle describing somebody as Godhead, I thought, okay, Michelle, whoever this is, I have to meet this person for you to drive me this way. So we go upstairs and to the dressing rooms up there. And the whiskey dressing rooms were like garbage dumps, to be honest. I mean, they reeked of cigarettes, man. The floors were littered. The walls were covered with graffiti from all the bands. But it was a whiskey dressing room, right? I mean, so many bands been there. And I had seen so many bands. Honestly, before I really started writing, when I was going to high school, I used to write for my high school paper. I mean, the Beach Boys and Humble Pie and the Allman Brothers with Dwayne. I mean, just sick shows. So the history there, you can feel it kind of, seeing out of the walls. So anyway, man, we walk in and she walks over and I see this guy. And honestly, I'm trying to remember if I recognized him, because the weird thing, and I go over this and I repeated this, and I just can't believe it myself. I had never seen Van Halen perform. And what was so weird is, like I said, I was at the Whiskey at least weekly, probably 2 or 3 times a week, right? I'd been to the Starwood, my God, which was just down the road from me. I mean, dozens and dozens of times. I'd seen so many bands there. And how I had never seen Van Halen perform before meeting Ed was I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. So I'm trying to remember whether I recognized him or not, whether I would have seen photos of him somewhere. I mean, obviously there's no internet. This is before their record came out. So, I don't even know if they had done any. Well, in fact, I don't think they had done any, major interviews at all where there would have been photos taken, maybe on flyers or something. Anyway, we walk over and Michelle says, Eddie Van Halen, Steve Rosen, Eddie Van Halen, Godhead. And Ed kind of smiled at the comment because he knew Michelle and he knew what that meant. So we kind of shake hands. And I had, of course, heard about Van Halen. I mean, everybody had heard about Van Halen. They were this Pasadena band who was signed a big record deal with Warner's. And, that was amazing news for all the strip bands. That said to them, hey, you practice hard and, you learn your riffs and maybe you too can get a record
and
deal.
proof that the strip wasn't dead, right? Because we had this whole thing come out of the 60s, but then there was a bit of a lull post the California country thing was going on. But even then, it wasn't there. It was, there's stuff happening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, the California country thing was actually, there was kind of like that was the Troubadour, you had the Eagles and those kinds of bands. And again, the punk thing was, running rampant at the Whiskey. I mean, it was there. I mean, they were there, pretty much every night. And I must admit, in all honesty, I was never a punk guy. I just didn't get it. It just went over my head. But so Van Halen also represented this sort of hey, rock guitar and electric guitar and rock is certainly still here. It hasn't gone away. So we just started talking, man, and the best way I can describe it, and again, we're going back to a moment in time. So what is that? 77, 87, 97, 2000, 217, 45 years ago. So it's a little tough to remember all the whys and wherefores, but I can just remember it was a very relaxed conversation, and I mean, I consider myself kind of I don't want to use the word extra, but I mean, I knew a lot about electric guitar players, and I knew a lot about Eric Clapton and Cream and Blackmore and Jeff Beck. I mean, I love those bands, and I'd interviewed some of those guys by then. So when the conversation turned to, Ed said, yeah, man, Cream and Clapton. It's like, this guy loves Cream and Clapton. I mean, there's this commonality here, and Richie
Right.
Black came up, and for me, I always measure a guy's knowledge by, if he makes a comment about Clapton and Cream and he says something that is below my knowledge threshold, or it's like an obvious comment that I think to
Right.
myself, well, that's kind of dumb. This guy thinks he knows about Cream and he says something, I mean, it's like,
Right.
I'm dismissive. I mean, it's the elitist in me, I mean, I'm not really like that, but
I get it. I get it.
Man, but he was making these comments about Clapton and Blackmore. And the thing with Ed is it went beyond just the music and the songs. I mean, he was talking about, finger vibrato, and he was talking about, Richie and the whammy bar, and it was like, whoa, he really knows. I mean, it was beyond stuff that I know. I mean, I knew inherently about that stuff. I couldn't have discussed it nearly as completely and with as much detail as Ed did. So, man, we just talked, and we talked about Jeff Beck. And it's funny, Michael Monarch came up, who was the guitar player in Steppenwolf. Michael Monarch was a monster Jeff Beck fan. And he did this weird thing, man. He tuned in open D, but he did this Beck stuff. I thought he was an amazing guitar player, but Ed brought him up, and I thought, wow, that's cool that he'd bring him up, because he was, semi-obscure. He was in Detective at the time, which was the band that Zeppelin signed to Swan Song, one of the first signings to their label. And I thought, wow, that's cool, because, again, Michael wasn't like this household name.
Right.
And, so we talked about him, and it was just so cool. And I thought, God, this guy's so amazing, what a cool guy. I'd like to talk to him again. There's just so much, that the guy has in common with me. And so we talked about, again, it could have been a half hour, it could have been 45 minutes, maybe it was an hour, hard to remember. And he says, hey, man, I'll be right back. And he kind of leaves the room, and he comes back, and he's got a pencil, and I think he pulled a piece of paper off the floor, an old ticket stub, Hey, man, here's my phone number, let's talk. I hope we can talk again,
Sure.
And I thought, wow, that's so cool, to get the guy's number. Now, again, I had heard of Van Halen. I knew that they were a band around town. We had talked about his deal, and he was so cool about it. He was so low key about it, But I didn't know how he played. I didn't know who he was as a player. So I didn't know any of that stuff when he gave me his number. I just thought, yeah, he must be a good guitar player. I mean, the band must be good to get a deal on Warner Brothers Records.
Right.
Several months later, the record comes in the mail. I was on Warner's mailing list, and as part of their monthly shipments, all the bands who were releasing records that month, the Van Halen record was in there. And I go, oh, wow, this is that guy, Van Halen. Here's Van Halen, look at the cover. I thought, yeah, that's cool, And again, famously, and I write about this at length, and I put it on, man. And I just didn't get it. I didn't think, he was good. He was obviously a good guitar player, and he had these chops, But there were some other really good guitar players around the strip at that time, man. Rusty Anderson was playing, who later went on to play in McCartney's band. He was an amazing guitar player. George Lynch was around. Terry Kilgore. These are really, really good guitar players. And I just didn't think, I didn't get it, and I thought, there's something that's eluding me. Next day I sat down, I really took the time, I put it down, and I don't know what it was, man. I just got it. I think my first instinct was, well, my God, this is the new voice of rock guitar. And what happens to all my heroes? What happens to my Jeff Becks and Richie Blackmores and Claptons and Paul Kalshoffs and Robin Trowers? I thought, my God, those guys couldn't play like Ed in a million years, Is that the end of that? In the way that maybe, Ed and Van Halen spelled the beginning of this new thing, and maybe that was the end of punk, so maybe those things went through my head.
Sure.
I don't know if I was that intuitive to think that way, but
well, anyway. I'm sure it's the same thing that people went through people's head when Hendrix was starting to break over in the UK, right? Because they're just like, whoa, someone rewrote the book here.
Absolutely, and even those guitar players, Jeff Beck said, he wanted to become a car mechanic. You know, he's like, well, I can't play like this guy, you know, and I know Townsend was pretty awed by it. And I think Clapton in his way, those guys obviously, you know, helped in discovering him. But yeah, absolutely. He was definitely the harbinger, just like Edward was. I mean, of this new style of guitar playing. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. And welcome to everybody that's been joining in while we've been talking here. Appreciate each and every one of you come in, and please leave a thumbs up if you haven't already. It helps us out with the algorithms. And it's kind of interesting, like you were saying, that you knew of the band, and you know you got to have a nice conversation with Eddie. And it's like, whereas most people would know, even around town, the music, but not necessarily know the person, or you know, it's like,
yeah,
the one piece of the puzzle you didn't have is the one piece that everybody else has in many ways. Yeah. But it's kind of cool because you get to meet the person first, as opposed to having this initial impression going in, which is great.
Exactly. Really cool. And, you know, and again, I write about it, you know, had I known, you know, maybe, you know, who he was and how insanely, you know, one of a kind he was, you know, would I have acted any differently? You know, man, I'd like to think that I wouldn't, you know, and by that time I'd met a lot of these guys. You know, I'd met Jeff Beck, and 77, I think I'd already interviewed Blackmore, Jimmy Page, you know, John McLaughlin, I think David Gilmour. I mean, heavy guys, you know, bands that I had listened to way before I was writing. And I'd like to think when I was sitting there across from them that I wasn't, you know, wide-eyed and in awe. You know, I'm some of that must have come across. But yeah. In meeting Ed and not knowing that, I think maybe that was part of that thing as well. And you know, maybe what Ed felt in me was, yeah, here's this guy, and he doesn't know who I am, or not that Ed would think that way, but you know, maybe there's a little piece of, yeah, he's a writer, but you know, he's never heard the band, and you know, so maybe that was a part of it. I don't know. I mean,
interesting. Now, at that time, when you were writing, was it a freelance, or were you with a specific publication?
I take that back. There were a couple times when I was sort of on the staff. I was never on the staff for Guitar Play, Guitar World. 99% of the time I was writing, I was always freelancing. There were some magazines that I wrote for pretty regularly, but I wasn't on the staff. There was a magazine back in the 80s called Record Review, and I was actually like a music editor. So I guess in a sense, I was on the staff. But no, other than that, it was always freelancing. You know, finding new magazines, reaching out to international magazines. Yeah, the life of a freelancer.
Sure. Yeah, I get it in many ways.
Yeah,
it's a one of the original gig industries in many ways. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you know, those are in my mind, I mean, those are the golden days of music magazines, right? I mean, they were all coming out then. You know.
Well, like the 70s into the 80s, we had that. You know, whereas was it like in the 50s, music was very corporate. The way it is today, here's a piece of music, perform it, you know, and everything was structured. And then by the 70s, bands were being more, you know, independent and free to do what they wanted to do. And the magazines reflected that in many ways. Like, you know, it was, well, we're kind of a counterculture magazine, but give it a decade and all of a sudden, no, that's the mainstream, but that's the attitude is, and we still see somewhat of that today. But definitely with, you know, knowledgeable writers out there that were doing stuff. And I'd be curious too, the guitar players, you know, like you have the person that interviewing them and they think this person has no idea who I am, as opposed to someone who has some knowledge and can ask some pertinent questions, you know, give them a head scratcher once in a while. Because they know you're going to ask this, and this, because I'm out promoting this, and this. But beyond that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I was a guitar player. You know, I mean, I played well enough not to be bad. Yeah, I mean, I was a good guitar player. I was obviously nowhere near any of these guys we're talking about. I mean, I was nowhere near any of these bands that were playing on the strip. But you know, I had a band, I had several bands, and that's why, I actually got to know Michelle. She, like I said, she had booked my band into some of these clubs, and I
Hmm.
was writing, and, I was a pretty good songwriter. I was a decent guitar player, but because I had that knowledge, I understood music theory. I understood, harmony and orchestration, and how you layer guitars. And I couldn't play solos like that, but I understood what they were. I understood guitar techniques. I couldn't tell you the difference between a 59 and a 62 Les Paul. But when those guys spoke about him, I knew what they were talking about. There was very
Right.
little that they could talk about that I didn't understand. And I think that gave me an insight into, interviewing these people and why I was
Right.
writing for a guitar player in Guitar World.
Right. As opposed to say Circus or Hip Parader or
Yeah,
something where,
exactly. Though I did do some of that stuff, and some of those stories were fun. Circus and Cream, which was the other
yeah.
side, a little bit more of the, sex, drugs, and rock and roll part. And then those are fun stories to write as well. But with Ed, that was always my thinking. It's like, I know the questions that every journalist is going to ask him. As a journalist, I knew what he's going to be asked. Ed, how do you tap? And Ed, who are your influences? And I'm not saying I didn't ask him those questions, but I
Right.
was asking him those questions really early, really, really early, where his answers to my questions were conceivably the first times he'd ever really thought about those
Right.
uh,
Okay.
techniques,
Yeah.
and building his guitars and what went into that. Um, Only by way of saying, I really tried to push Ed early on. He'd
Hmm.
always say, "Oh man, I hate doing interviews. I don't like doing this and that." The reality is, when Ed got into it, he was a really good. He was an amazing interviewee. And I'd push him into stuff, and I could see it on his face. Sometimes he'd get frustrated because, man, you're
Hmm.
asking a lot of questions, or man, that's going back a long way. I just sit there and be silent, and either he'd want to try and answer it, or he
Right.
wouldn't, but when he took a second and he tried to dig, that's when some of these really cool bits came out. And I think readers, who are reading my interviews, I think that's what they sensed.
Right.
And I'm hoping that's what they sensed in the book, because a lot of bits, um, you know, that went much deeper, I left out of the original interviews. Edward had said, "Hey, don't print this stuff," and I didn't. Um,
Right.
so, and I actually want to address this right here. Um, uh, a couple of people, and not many, of all the books that I've sold, of all the remarkable responses I've had and reactions from people, and there's so many people here, Keith and Fruitcake and all these people who,
Yeah. You see it,
you
Tony?
know, yeah, man, and how much they love the book, and how much they're so happy that it was so complete. There are a couple of people who said, "Well, man, but you printed that stuff where it's, where Ed said, don't print this, or off the record." So it's just a couple things that I don't know if people understand. One, he made those comments at that moment in time. So again, he may have been talking about an interview that we did in, and I can't remember the specific moments, in 80 or 81. He says, "Hey man, don't
Sure.
print this." When maybe he was making a comment about the music, or the label, or a bandmate, or his dissatisfaction. And it's like,
Right.
at that point in time, yeah, man, for me to have printed that, one, he would have gone ballistic. Um, um, he would have screamed bloody murder at me. But two,
Hmm.
he knew, for him to say that he never had to worry, because I would never ever have divulged any of that stuff.
Right.
With Eddie, it was all about respect, and for me to have done that means I would have disrespected him, and he would have said, "Fuck you, I'm not talking to you anymore." And
Right.
and right,
Exactly.
so, right.
Yeah. I
So
get that. Yeah. Because it could be something as big as like, yeah, I'm going to be signing with Kramer next year, but you can't say that now. But you're a
exactly,
friend. I'm letting you in the loop on it, but it's not public knowledge. You're
exactly,
like, fine.
exactly. And trust me, man,
And then
I
and
knew
then it
about that
becomes,
Kramer.
yeah, obvious years later to everyone else. Well, now we can say it, And but
Exactly,
it
exactly.
shows
And I
that he was talking about it at that time. I get it.
exactly, and I knew about that Kramer stuff way before he ever
Right.
said it. I don't have that on tape, so I don't really reference that in the book. I don't want to like conjure, "Oh yeah, we talked about that a year or two." I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to rewrite history.
Right.
You know, I didn't want to take mythology, real mythology, and turn it into history. I didn't want to do that. But
Right.
yeah, he talked about Kramer way before, and I talked about the night he asked me about, you know, hey man, should I do it? And I was thinking, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. As it turned out, he should not have done that in my mind. I think Kramer treated him not very right. They brought in other people. Ed ultimately left. To get back to the original point, so he said these things to me that in that moment they weren't appropriate to print. 45, 46, 47 years later, when I'm writing this book, to me, it has to be a part of the book. If I leave that stuff out, then, well, shit, man, I'll leave that stuff out, and, well, maybe I'm not going to talk about Ed smoking so many cigarettes, or, you know, I'll be honest, me doing cocaine with Edward, and, you know, I don't paint myself in the brightest light.
It was a time and a place.
You know, I never got high with Ed, you know, but
yeah, we're all choir boys, right?
Exactly.
And then you're reading, you're like, who wrote this? Did the marketing department of the label write this? You know, that's what we come across, right?
Exactly. I would not have written a book if that's the kind of book I had honestly lowered myself to write. So in answer to those people who had those gripes, one, those comments were made 45 years ago or more. Two, I could have written a book 580 words long saying that the guy is the fucking greatest guitar player who's ever lived. I mean, I almost do that. I try not to be so blatant about it. And I try to weigh it with this other side. The book's called Understanding Edward. You know, the guy was an incredibly complex guy. You know, so it had to have this other stuff in there. At no moment did I think, oh man, I'm going to put this stuff in here because this is going to be controversial and this is going to make people go, wow, you know, Ed, I didn't know that, or that Rosen, why did you know, or in some respects trying to hurt or defame the family, though I've had no contact with anybody over there, you know, since 2003. The last thing I would ever have wanted to do was to hurt or embarrass any of them. And had they reached out to me, maybe they heard I was writing a book or working on a book and said, hey, whoever it could have been, say, hey man, we heard you're working on this, you know, could we read the manuscript? I would have sent it in a second. Though my instincts probably would have told me, don't do that. But, you know, I would have done that. And they said, hey, my God, these sections are hurtful to us. Don't print them. As much as it would have gone against my better judgment and my instincts as a writer, not to have included them, I would not have included them. So that's why those bits are in there. And I know that they're going to raise the ire of some people. And I know some of those comments he made about Mike and Dave and Sammy weren't exactly positive. But, oh, I'm sorry, guys. I apologize.
Quite all right.
You know, I tried to balance
that. Was with Wolfgang going, no, I liked the book. I liked it.
Exactly. I mean, I also put in all those comments about how much, you know, he loved Mike, he loved Dave, he loved Sammy. At the end of the day, he felt disrespected by them because they didn't seem to love the music as much as he did. You know, ultimately, I mean, he had strange ways of saying that. So, I mean, I tempered that on the other side by saying how much respect and how much love he had for those guys. So anyway, man, that's a long answer to those people who goes, well, why would Rosen have put that stuff? As Ed said, don't print. Because because it had to be in there. Because if I buried that, it never gets read, and we never know those moments. We never understand how important it was to Ed to keep that stuff to himself. So in some respects, those moments are almost maybe the most important moments for him to say, hey, don't print this. You know what I mean? They were the most personal. So how could I leave those moments out and say that?
And it explains a lot too, in a sense. Like I always thought Eddie had some form of inner turmoil, which a lot of artists do. You know, like let's be honest, we all go on that side of the spectrum. But you know, because you know he had a handful of crutches over the years. You know, starting with cigarettes, we'll just go there and you know whatever, and a lot of people do. and it was a long-term thing. So obviously there was some internal struggle of some kind, and a lot of it can be unresolved issues and stuff like that. You never know. So, and I don't think Eddie ever went to therapy, which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah. He, later after well, no, I take that back. I'm not. I believe that he started singing. Yeah, well, I know he did because he talked about her. I can't think of her name at the moment. But he started. Yeah, he started seeing a therapist. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we all have issues. For him, for us to think that Edward Van Halen, because he's Edward Van Halen, didn't have issues. I mean, that's that's rose-colored glasses thinking. Yeah. And in my tiny way, I tried to address. That's not even the right word. I tried to understand why he felt that way, and I tried to, posit my 3 cents and why he felt some of those things. The very, very, very sad thing is that we'll never know any of those answers.
Right.
And for as much as I thought I knew about him and hanging out with him for 26 years, man, it just touched the surface. I mean, I could have written 10 more books had our relationship stayed together. I mean, there was a million more things I wanted to talk about. Simple things, I just wanted to ask him about so many other guitar players and so much more music and deeper things in his family and those relationships and but anyway, yeah, he had stuff going on, and I saw it. I was around it, and I was touched by it, and I had stuff going on, and he was touched by it, and he always tried to help me, and in my small way, I tried to help him, and I had to write about those things. I just had to do that. So for anybody who reads that stuff, who has concerns about the book, I thought I was trying to, exploit him or do something like that.
I can honestly say, from an outside looking at it, I don't think that happened, for the simple reason that if there was some gossipy tidbit that sets the world on its ear, the loud wires of the world and stuff would have picked up on it, and it would have been gossip central and all over social media. And I didn't see any of that, So I think it seems to be okay. And I'm sure somebody in the camp has perused the book by this point, and they haven't said anything. And excuse me. Hey, Stones fan. Stir for me?
Oh, nice. I wonder what his name is. There was I'm sorry. There was quite a few people from Australia. It was interesting. I mean, probably the UK, Canada, and Australia were probably the biggest kind of international territories. Which I suppose makes sense in a way. Australia was a little surprised. I didn't know that Van Halen were that huge there. I mean, it's not surprising they were. What would have been exploiting him is if I'd written the book, in 2008, or
right.
I mean, that would have been.
Or the one that conveniently comes out like a month after his passing or something like that, because you've just been sitting on it for years or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And, So
Holly says Tonechaser is written with total respect, Mr. Steve.
Well,
and I believe her.
I appreciate that. I tried, man. I tried as hard as I could.
And we should mention, where is the book available at?
Can I do this?
You can.
Really? Nice. The book is actually available several places now. You can get it directly from me through my PayPal link, which is just paypal.me/Tonechaser. PayPal.me/Tonechaser. It's $47, which includes shipping here in the U.S. Includes your address. And if you can remember, please send it as family and friends. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't cost you anything. And if you don't do that, PayPal takes a bite, and I
Yep.
hate giving them more money. And it's also available on Amazon, Reverb, for those of you who know
Nice.
who Reverb is, where you can buy music gear, and Etsy, Etsy, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
a strange site.
Yeah,
The
but they
book,
own Reverb, so might as well.
yeah, and the book is more on those sites because honestly, they take such a huge percentage that I actually end up with about the same amount as I end up on PayPal. So if you just go to any of those sites, PayPal, Etsy, Reverb, or Amazon, and just type in Tonechaser, it will bring you to my book. And for any of you international people, oh, freaking great.
There you go.
If
Thanks,
you
Terry.
contact me at on my email, I can give you like the shipping costs. And
Mm-hmm.
my email is SC Rosen, Rosen, at sbcglobal.net. SC Rosen at sbcglobal.net. And I can give you the shipping charges. Unfortunately, and I have no control over this at all, shipping from the time when I first started taking pre-orders way back, like in February, thinking, the book will be here in April. The book will be here in June. I'll be here in August, And, people were so cool about waiting, and the prices that I had quoted people, shipping prices back then, my God, they just about tripled, and people, I felt embarrassed to ask, but I kind of went out there and asked people, listen, the shipping to Canada has gone from $20 to like $48. Could you see your way to, send the difference? And not one person said one word about, hey, no, man, you said it was this and I'm not going to pay. Not one person said that, And I just thought that was so amazingly cool. But, so anyway, man, shipping expenses are expensive, and Australia is crazy. And there was some New Zealand, and some of the interior of Europe gets a little expensive. But on the flip side of that, it's a 500-page.
Asks, is the book available in ebook form?
That's an excellent question. I'm considering it. I'm trying to put that together. I'm trying to make sure I have a handle on this book and I can get books out in a timely manner. But I've been thinking about the ebook and talking to some people. Ebooks, you're supposed to be able to follow like a software program and this and that. I mean, there's no way on this earth that I could do it. I'm lucky I can, handle a PayPal.
At best, I can take a photo of each page and send you the photographs of each page. That's about as close to an ebook as I get.
Exactly. So I'm gonna, maybe find somebody who could help me. But I have been thinking about that, and I've also been thinking, and I know I've discussed this a couple times. I guess the best way to describe it is an enhanced ebook or an enhanced audiobook. Whereby I'm not sure if all the text would be available in audio, but the text would be there. And again, I haven't thought about it. I don't even know if it can be done, or maybe some of the text would be there. And as you've read in the book, there's interview stuff. So the text would be there, and then there would be, again, I don't know if it's clicking on a link, or I don't know how that works, but you click on something and there would be the audio, the actual audio of me talking with Edward in that first interview, or me talking with Edward when he's playing the riffs from Women and Children First, or some of those Twilight tapes, what I describe as the Twilight tapes, which were basically these off-the-record conversations that Edward and I had. They weren't interviews, but just kind of conversations. That got into some heavy stuff. So you're reading this stuff about Edward talking about his dad or his family, and then you'd hear Edward talking, or maybe my comments. And I thought that would be incredibly interesting for people to hear. One of the things I tried to do, which I thought was a little different, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work, was sort of become two people in the book. So I'm the person writing the book, I'm actually three, Phil. I'm the person that's writing the book. I'm the author. I'm the participant. So I'm there. I'm back in 1977, and I'm standing there in the whiskey with Edward. I'm the participant, and this author is writing about this guy back then. But then I'm also the observer. I'm this person, maybe like one of you. You probably would have seen the same thing. Anybody here in the audience here, or you, Ben, if you were standing in the corner, and you were watching, you'd go, "Wow, yeah, they're getting along." And yeah, God, that Edward guy, man, he smokes a lot of fucking cigarettes, and yeah, he seems like a happy dude. And yeah, well, I guess he would, he's got a record deal, and he's getting this acclaim. So this observer is looking at this Steve Rosen guy standing there with Eddie Van Halen and writing, yeah, Ed seemed happy, and Ed was smoking a lot of cigarettes. So I tried to enhance the experience of what I saw as a participant as this observer. So that's the thing that I tried to do. So I guess what I'm trying to say is now, and what I tried to do is actually describe the inflections in Edward's voice. Was he happy? Was he sad? Was he morose? Was he contemplative?
Sure.
What was he like that day? What did it look like watching him holding that guitar pick, 2 feet from him, and what did the guitar sound like, and how did he, so I thought by hearing Edward's voice and maybe my voice at that point in time, you get even more of a sense of the words on the page.
Sure.
I don't know if any of this makes sense, but I just think that it would be fantastic, because I've had responses to the interviews I put up with Ed on a YouTube, my YouTube channel page. People seem to have loved that stuff. So I think now you've read the book and you've read the text, and now here it is Edward saying those exact words and Steve Rosen's responses. I don't know, man. I think it's like being inside the inside. You know what I mean? It's like this. You're inside the circle now. So I don't know, man. So I'm also thinking about that,
I think, well, and thank God for podcasts, because I don't know about you. I can sit and listen to a conversation long form. I miss long form interviews. I miss long form conversations, So, and by the way, thank you very much, All Dave, All Night. He says, hello, everyone in the chat. I hope you're all doing well this evening. If you don't own a copy of Steve's book yet, be sure and get one. It's an excellent read with lots of insight about EVH. Yes, I'm definitely getting a copy after this. I was already leaning towards it before hanging out with Steve here, and the more that we talk, and I can hear the passion, and I can't read enough on Eddie myself, anyways, because he's he's our generation's Jimi Hendrix and Elvis Presley all wrapped up in one.
Yeah.
I don't know if my cousin's still in the chat. I was talking to him the other day, Steve, and it was interesting. I said, when we were young kids, let's say 40 years ago, you go over to, a relative's house or a friend's house. You had no idea what kind of music their parents listened to, unless they were an Elvis fan, because there was always some form of small shrine or a painting or something.
Yeah.
And I see that with Eddie heads. There's always something. Or everything, but at least something. There's a nod to the man. Even driving down the road, you'll see a striped mailbox or something. You're like, hey, he's one of us.
It's really true, Ben. You bring up some interesting points. One, you talk about people who had passion for the book. I can't even begin to tell you what that means to me. I wanted people to walk away with this visceral thing. Even if they just knew Edward Van Halen a little bit better than they did before, that's what I was hoping about. It's hard to get. I'm an avid reader. I read a lot. I have my favorite authors, but it's hard to get really passionate about a book. But these people seem to have had real passion for it, and the reason they do. And I'm not just saying it's because they're writing. I'm not saying that at all. It's because they're passionate about Edward. And you're right. A Van Halen fan is different than a Zeppelin fan and a Rush fan, a Kiss fan. Look, I'm not saying those people don't have passion for those bands. They do. But with Ed, it was something different, you know. It's like Edward. They had
even if it wasn't your cup of tea, you still respected the guy. Like my dad, lifelong musician. He's a total rockabilly guy. Got into country in the '80s because that's what the gig entailed. And you know, he's the type of guy that if you use more gain than CCR, forget about it. He hated Hendrix. He says, he's a sound technician. He's not a musician. But Eddie Van Halen goes, that guy. He uses too much gain for my liking, but man, he can play. And I went, okay. And that, you know, that's my dad. You know, he's like, yeah, mutual respect. So
yeah, definitely. And it's hard to explain what I'm trying to explain. I've been around Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and these genre-changing guitar players, and you know, I mean, there's a lot of them. And I've seen fans around them. I've been at the concerts and I've been backstage and I've watched fans. But with Eddie, it was something different. It was even beyond. It was beyond the music. They loved Edward. They wanted to be his friend. You know, they thought that they would run into Edward at the grocery store or the music store, which they did, and they would. And I was there with Ed, you know, going to Guitar Center, and I don't think I could imagine Jimmy Page going into a local guitar store to buy guitar strings. I'm talking about once he was Jimmy Page, you know, or Jeff Beck or Pete. They just weren't going to do it. Ed did those things. He didn't see that other side of himself, you know, this legend thing, and he didn't see himself the way fans did, and that's what endeared him to everybody. And that's why fans loved him in a special way. I don't think any other guitar player was ever loved and revered. At least
I think he seemed like the type of guy that, you know, like LA was his hometown, and when he's home, he's home. He's not in hiding. You know, that was the impression that I got, at least, you know, until a certain point in time, which then you do get too famous and stuff, and I get that, but. You know, you hear the famous story, you know, like I love one of my favorite stories about Eddie is Dweezil's story about Eddie showing up and he's like, opens the door and there's Eddie in full stage gear, you know, because that's how we rolled. Like, these are my clothes. This is what I'm wearing.
Yeah. Ed, Ed did that. I mean, again, I write in the book, Ed would just, there'll be a knock on the screen door, you know, I looked and it was Edward, and we lived pretty close to one another. And he'd just drive over, man. And those were the best moments, you know, because he wasn't coming over to do an interview, or I wasn't going over there doing an interview, which were amazing. But he was just coming, you know, and every time it happened, and I tried to write about it, you know, it's Eddie Van Halen on your doorstep. And, you know, it might have been the 20th time he's done it. And I might have known him for years, but every time he's there on his doorstep, you know, I have to stop and think, holy fuck, this is Eddie Van Halen on my doorstep, you know. And it was a weird thing. It was really...
It's got to be like hanging out with the Fonz. That's the only thing I can equate it to. It's got to be like hanging out with the Fonz.
Yeah. He was just a special person, you know.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
Absolutely.
So my question, we touched on a bit about the Kramer deal. Just hypothetically, who would you think Eddie should have went with in the 80s? You know, given that he was this free agent and everybody's handing him guitars.
Yeah, man, I got a great answer for you. Nobody. Okay. Ed could have walked into any guitar shop and said, listen, this is the guitar I play. You know, it could have been the Frankenstrat, the Bumble, any of those guitars, you know, that we know and love off those, you know, first couple records. And again, I think it should be known that he never played a Kramer on record. At least that's what he told me. Some guys say, well, yeah, he did. And I can only tell you what he told me. So, you know, by the time the first record come out, I think he could have called anybody. He could have called Fender, Gibson, you know, whoever was around back in the day. Ibanez, ESP, whatever those companies are around, those bigger companies,
Sure.
any boutique company. So listen, this is the guitar I play. I want you to build this guitar for me. I want it built out here. I don't care if your shop is in New York. I want you to put a shop together out here. Though he may not have said that, though he could have.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, these are the guitars I want to play. I may or may not tell you that your company built them. I'm not going to endorse them. There's not going to be an Eddie Van Halen model. And that's what he should have done.
Right.
You know, in my mind, that's what he should have done. Because,
right.
The Kramer guitars, hey, he liked those guitars. He said as much to me. And I never dismissed the guitars. If they had been shitty guitars, he never would have played them. Right. But they were to his specs. He had to, and the guitars they were building for him, were those the same guitars that were available, en masse?
No.
Did he have a?
You couldn't even buy a 5150 shaped guitar, really. It was kind of like a Pacer, but it wasn't. Which I thought was always odd too. I'm thinking, Kramer, you're putting all this money, or whatever, behind Eddie, but I'm like, why isn't there, because as soon as you went to Music Man, because it's like lessons learned, he's like, I'm putting my name on it, I'm getting a cut of every unit sold, that, yeah.
Yeah. So he does Music Man, and he does the Wolfgang guitars, and he played those guitars. Yeah, I mean, Edward may have made a fair amount of money off of that, by his income. It was probably minuscule. So, I mean, I never would have asked him a question like that, and he would never have brought it up. But, for him to go, do a company deal because he was going to make money, I mean, that's just ludicrous.
Well, and I don't even think that, it seemed like that. And I could be completely wrong, but even into the 80s, most endorsement deals was here, have some free gear. And it wasn't much beyond that, unless you had a signature model. And nobody really had a signature model until towards the late 80s. I'm thinking like the Clapton Strat and things like that.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I guess when he started playing all those guitars, it was just a little bit of the magic of who he was.
Yeah. Like you say, uncharted territory, you have this guitar player and everyone's trying to get him to play their stuff. Well, we'd never really had that before, because by the time a guitar player was famous, they had one guitar, and that's the guitar they used for the majority of their career, it seemed.
Yeah. But, the tale of a guitar player building his own guitar out of, crap seconds, and rewiring the whole sonic landscape. I mean, that's like, and then to go play a guitar that somebody else built.
Exactly.
Did he play any better? I mean,
after stating in how many interviews playing that Frankenstein guitar, like, I built this because it didn't exist, and still. They barely existed because it was the early days of Kramer and Charvel and
Charvel, yeah. So, I mean, those are my feelings. Other people might say, "No, man, the Kramers were his best guitar sounds." I mean, I'm not even going to go there. I mean, that's whimsy. I mean, I can't say, "Yeah, man, the guitar sound on the first record is better than the guitar sound on, the fifth record, or the sixth record," when he started playing those guitars in the studio. But
as technology is changing too, and recorded albums just sounded better year to year, it seemed too. So it's hard to say the big production of albums versus the first album. It's night and day.
Yeah. Yep.
And everyone's commenting on their favorite album now.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll say my favorite. Diver Down is my favorite because it was the first one I heard. So it got me interested.
Yeah, that happens a lot. VH2, and Keith Campbell says, Les Paul. He didn't care for the Gibsons that Gibson made for him. Famously, the night that I introduced Edward to Les Paul at the Guitar Center Rock Walk, that came up. Obviously they both built their own guitars and played their guitars, and Les sang, was it the SG that Les didn't care for, and that he didn't want his name on it. That's why later on, you hear people calling them SG Les Pauls. They weren't really. I mean, they were SGs, but he didn't want his name on it because he thought it was a piece of crap. Exactly. I think he said at that point it became Gibson's biggest seller. It was an amazing guitar for what it was, but yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, talk about the other way, right? Yeah, you have a quote unquote signature guitar. Here, we've completely redesigned your signature guitar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I think Tom was asking, was Valerie around the band in '81?
She was. I think. Again, it's so hard for me to remember my chronology. Didn't he meet her on the '81 tour? Or it could have been the '82 tour. I honestly can't remember. But it was right around there. And I write about Valerie. I love Valerie. I mean, in a friendly, affectionate way. I thought she was great. Those early years when I saw them together, when she was up at the house, if I was up at 5150, I mean, they doted on each other. It was, sweetie, what can I do for you? And, are you happy? I mean, I saw it, and it wasn't this fake, it wasn't this facade thing. I mean, they really cared about each other. I think, I know that they both, they respected each other. They respected their careers. I know that Valerie, and we never talked about, Valerie ever said, oh, isn't Eddie a great guitar player? It was never those kinds of conversations, but I knew from speaking with her, I think I was intuitive enough to sense that she was extraordinarily proud of who her husband was. And she recognized the artistry in him. She came from that background, and the acting thing. And I'm sure she had actors that she emulated, and I'm sure she understood the work ethic and creating that legend and that presence, I thought they were amazing together in those early days. Later on, I mean, I don't know what happened. I mean, who knows what happens?
Right.
People drift apart, life gets too crazy, careers get too big. It was sad. I mean, it was sad.
Well, in all honesty, it lasts a lot longer than 99% of Hollywood couples per se.
I suppose, it was a strange moment, and I almost didn't put this in the book because it made me look like an asshole. But this is, I can't remember when this is. This is pretty late. Probably one of the last times I ever spoke to Ed, and I don't want to give anything away, so I'm not even going to describe what had gone on there. But so I'm talking with Ed, and I don't know if they were legally divorced then or they had separated, but they weren't together. And Ed said as much. And I hadn't spoken to Ed for a while. So I said, man, I said, I'm sorry. He says, no, man, don't be sorry. Why would you say that? And the way he said that was, I guess everybody said that. He didn't want to hear it. It was for him a positive thing. I didn't write any of this, and I was embarrassed by his reaction because it was not like, oh, well, why would you say that? It wasn't like a benign comment. It was like, why would you say that? Like jumping on me. It was like, whoa.
Which would be like, we found out she was cheating and blah, 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 like complete craziness. Yeah, then I can understand his reaction. If you say, I'm sorry, you're like, what? I got out of that, but we didn't see any of that. Yeah.
Man,
I understand why you would say
much
that.
Bigger than should have come from my question, and obviously there was a whole lot beneath that. and again, I didn't write any of this stuff. I mean, I did write that, his reaction, and maybe I would have written, I couldn't believe his reaction. I didn't write any of this stuff I'm talking about now because, again, it's conjecture on my part. It's not like we continue that conversation. It's like these things. Like I said, I wish I could have spoken to him more. It's like, well, Ed, why would you react that way? Why would you say that? I was just trying to offer condolences. Those are the kinds of things I wish we could have talked about, because I know that at the back of that was some inner thing that, really would have explained a lot about who he was and what he was going through.
Right.
But, I wasn't going to write about that, not having it on tape. In fact, I don't think I ever did that. And if I did, I wrote in the book, I said, well, listen, this is just my opinion or my feelings. I never said, hey, this is what, I wasn't going to do that. So, yeah, and now we never know. It's like, what was he feeling that night? Why would he react that way? I mean, it was a combination of hurt and attack and being defensive and being lonely. And it's like, where did all that stuff come from, And now nobody will ever know that. Maybe Valerie knows. I don't think so. I mean, they had been apart for so long. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. True. Yeah, I see we got a bunch of Alan Holsworth chat in the talk in the chat in the talk. Please, okay, Ben.
Yeah, and I talked to Edward. We talked a little bit about Alan. There's another subject I wish we could have talked more about. We talked about Edward, seeing him at the Roxy and jamming, which he loved, and going to MI, Musicians Institute. And, but I never really talked to Edward about, why Alan Holdsworth, what was it about his playing? Get into it. And along the same lines, Ed was a pretty big fan of that progressive kind of stuff. UK was one of his bands. He loved Bruford. But I never talked to him about, did you listen to Genesis or, Steve Hackett or?
I'm going to say he didn't listen to Genesis since they originally named the band Genesis.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I'm assuming they weren't on his radar.
At that point, they certainly weren't. Can't imagine he never listened to him after the fact, but yeah.
To know. That is true.
Yeah, Holly brings up on a different subject here, Eddie and Al. Both married Vals. Which is true. Coincidentally. Not sure what it means.
As one brother said to the other, I'm really happy in life. You need to get a Val. I will.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Very nice. Definitely, if you have any questions, folks, if we've missed it, please just type it in the chat again, and we'll definitely get to them. We'll go till the bottom of the hour here, and this has been great stuff. I'm learning stuff, and I'm enjoying the stories. Nice. Did you spend any? I don't know if you would, because I guess it would be as much as a friend as opposed to an interview per se. But any time with Eddie while he was in the studio actually recording, or?
I don't think I was ever there.
They're usually kind of closed anyways, but never know.
Really close. I mean, I was up at 5150. There was like and it wasn't a booth. And this may have been before 5150 was built. This could be going back years. But there was kind of just a room, where spare parts were, and whoever the office manager or was at that time, was out there. And a lot of times I'd go up there and I'd be with Ed and I'd say, hey man, I got to go do some shit. And he'd go into the studio. And again, this may have been before 5150. It's honestly hard to remember. And he might have gone in and just been noodling with some stuff or recording, some ideas or something. But that's about as close as I ever got. And I never asked, say, hey man, can I come hang out at a session?
Right.
That was just a bridge too far. That was his world.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't going to do that. Because I know he would have said no, and I would have been embarrassed by asking. Right. I obviously would have loved to have seen that process.
Yeah, I was thinking about, it might be like, hey, like, let's get together tomorrow, pop by at 2 and we'll go out and do something, but he may be running late. That's kind of the only way you would think.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of situation.
Yeah. There's one moment in the book where we're actually at Sunset Sound. And again, it's hard for me to remember my own book, but I referenced something about, is that the song I just heard? Meaning they were still recording at Sunset Sound, and he had played me a tape. And had I heard the session, I'm 98% positive I never saw a session. Could I have been at some session at some point when they were just maybe setting up or noodling with sounds? I mean, that's possible. I don't think so. But that's one of the difficulties about writing a book 45 years after the fact, and I write about that in the book, how difficult it was to remember things and how I wish I could have remembered more. And there would be a bit of a conversation on a tape. The tape could be from 1982. I'm just pulling dates here.
Sure.
June 82. And he could have referenced something that could have been 3 weeks earlier.
Right.
But it wasn't a conversation that was recorded. So, yeah, in 1982, June, when he said, yeah, man, when that thing happened 3 weeks earlier, I knew what he was talking about back in 1982, 3 weeks earlier.
Right.
44 years later, it's like, what the hell is he talking about?
Right.
For him to reference it must have been important, and I'm trying, and there are no clues whatsoever for me to go by. And
right.
That's, as I'm listening to the tapes, that's also what took so long. I had to listen to every word, one, because I wanted to get them right in transcribing them. Two, I wanted to make the chronology as perfectly accurate as I could. But three was listening to those cues. And sometimes it would literally be one phrase. Oh, yeah, man, we met the whiskey when Cheap Trick was there. That's the night. Now I can go back and find the date. Or he'd reference an album and go, oh, okay, so this tape is from 83, and when I had no clue because the cassette wasn't dated. So, my misgivings are, one, I didn't record every second I was with him. But how can you know those things? I'm talking about before the book. I knew how important he was even before I was going to write a book back in 85. Why, I should have just had the cassette on all the time, but you can't do that, man. I can't watch, I just, there's things you can't do.
There'd be a million cassettes, and then you always feel like you're on, right? You're like, you're not going to be quite as relaxed and loose. And
yeah, but God, I regret some of those moments, not having the tape on, and some of the conversations we had. So.
Yeah, it's when he's kicking himself going, man, I wish Steve had recorded that conversation. I was noodling on something and that idea's gone or something like that.
Yeah, well, it sort of happened one time. And again, for people who've read the book, and for people who haven't read the book, why the hell not?
Right.
I'm kidding. When I saw Dave after David left the band, and I met him at the Country Club, which is a club, kind of out here in the valley, like half hour away from where I live, where Edward used to live. And Dave was there, and I had a little conversation with him, and Dave's talking about the new band, and this and that. I asked him about Edward, and as I'm talking to Dave, I'm thinking, I'm going to tell Ed, I ran into Dave. I know that Edward is going to ask me about it. And that's the one time, excuse me, and I was just there at the show. I forget who was playing. Maybe Tallis was playing, Billy Sheehan's band.
Mhm.
That would have made sense because I kind of knew Billy. I wish I had the tape player. I could have had, like I said, Ed, here's what Dave said. But he asked me questions several times because he wanted to know what Dave said. David left the band. I mean, it's
Right.
human nature. He wanted to know what Dave said,
Yeah.
And I tried to remember as best I could and tried to recount that conversation. But yeah. And I bet had I had the tape on all the time, Ed would have said, "Hey man, do you have that tape where I was doing those bits and pieces?" Though Ed really tended to record everything he did. He always would turn on a boom box. And, he had that wired into his rig, or he'd start a tape rolling or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Holly asks, when do you think we'll be able to talk openly about the book? We are. Can we set a date like January 1st?
I think Holly, Holly has been an extraordinary supporter and a believer in the book from the beginning. She's helped me in so many ways. She turned me on to you, Ben. She's provided me with addresses and names. She talks about the book. She would write questions. She'd read the book and she'd have questions. And she'd send me these questions, and these weren't surface questions. She had read below the surface, and I think that's what she's talking about, getting really deep into the heart of it. Maybe talking about some of the darker, deeper stuff in here, which I haven't done. And I kind of say, well, in my book, maybe the new year, when there are more discussions, hopefully, the book will be, out there more. And I guess one of the reasons I don't talk about a lot of this stuff in detail, I don't want to ruin the experience for anybody. And not that it's there's a reveal at the end, but there is in a way. I want the book to unfold for everybody, just as if they didn't really know that much about the book. So I'm telling them about the book. I'm trying to talk a little bit in generalities anyway. But for people, thanks, Tom. Tom is cool, man. He's been on some chats, and he's another one of these guys.
He's a great guy. One of my best friends in the world.
He's fantastic,
we love Tom.
I'll happily sign it, Tom. Then Quentin said it makes an interesting point. Some of that deeper and darker stuff needs to remain between Steve and Ed. Look, anything that I wrote in the book, I'm willing to talk about. And are there moments that lie beneath that was hard for me to write about? If I think about it, there was probably some stuff,
What's up, Charles?
I think I tried to lay most of it out there. So there'll come a time when all this stuff will come out. When
I think everyone should grab the book, definitely, because I've always thought, when I got into the YouTube community, and there's a lot of Van Halen content out there, but it's a lot of third-hand knowledge in many ways, because the Van Halen camp had always kept everything close to the vest for years prior to the internet. So, and then definitely during. So, getting more first-hand knowledge on stuff like that, regardless of time frame of career, it's great, and it allows all of us to fill in some blanks here and there, because we all have these ideas. So I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely. And I'm not going to, for me to say, people have asked, why did you write the book? And it's a really difficult question. I even try to answer it in the book, and I don't even know I can answer it for myself. I desperately wanted to write the book. I desperately didn't want to write the book. Um, I knew that the book would be unique for these very reasons you're talking about. That no one else, no other writer had this relationship with Ed. And I'm quick to add that those other books that have come out, Brad Tolinsky's and Chris's book, Conversations with Edward, and Paul Brannigan's book, and in fact, I think they're both called Eruption. Those are marvelous books. Those guys are extraordinary writers. And they were both kind enough to, write little comments.
Nice.
On the back of my book. And in their books, they've referenced me in the most generous fashions. Their books are absolutely important to read and own. But in answering that question, because it was a unique relationship, I wanted to write the book, not because I felt obligated to fans in any way. That's too strong a word, but I just thought that there was a story there that people really would want to hear. I could have been wrong, and people could have read this stuff and go, "Oh, this is too self-serving," or I don't want to read those things. But I didn't know, so part of it, well, a big part of it, honestly, was a gamble. But at the end of the day, it was just something I felt I had to write, and even if it never, honestly, even if it had never come out, I was going to write it.
Right.
I'm trying to remember what my original thought was. But yeah, I hope it fills in some of the holes for readers, and that they get something from it.
Outside of like Eddie of doing an autobiography that will, surface to the light of day, or I guess possibly, let's say, Wolfgang writing a book about his dad, because that would be a perspective. You're kind of like the closest person that could, in many ways, that it's not just, oh, I've gathered all this public information and compilated it into a book. It's not just a random person per se. Someone who has firsthand knowledge, which is as a book should be.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I agree. And I thought about Wolf writing a book one day, and I think he will. He seems like the type of person that would. The thing about Wolf is, he obviously he's Edward's son, but how clear are his memories when he was 8? Or I mean, I can't remember. My God,
sure.
Maybe he can.
Well, in his book would be like, I think I could read your book in his book, and it's going to give me two different perspectives of a man, because it's two completely different viewpoints. Even if you guys say both were talking about Eddie in 1995, for instance, his perspective of Eddie at that, in your, it's going to be completely different.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, not completely, but there will be some overlap. But
yeah,
definitely.
I mean, the person really to write the book is Al, right?
Yeah.
But yeah. So I was in a unique place, and again, not obligated, but I wanted to write the book. People said, man, if you don't write it, that book doesn't get written, and all of that is gone. And I've always had this feeling of being like I don't know what the word is, documentarian, an archivist, and it's like I collected the tapes, and I had my tapes and this and that, and why did I do all that? Not just Van Halen's tapes, all my tapes that I've, all the interviews I've done, and why did I keep them, and so anyway, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm happy I did.
I would say the only thing outside of a book is a literary documentary in many ways of a snapshot. The only other thing would be, I don't know, splicing the interviews together with a photo gallery, you know, it's a slideshow essentially, and that kind of a documentary was spliced in with people talking about the interview. Like, I think you did the right thing with it, because that's the best way to do it. Because let's be honest, unless the documentary is going to be like 6 hours, like the Tom Petty documentary, a book is the best form for this stuff to really get the deep dive.
Yeah. You can describe things in minute detail in a book, which is what I did. Yep. And at 580 pages, I thought, dude, you have to stop writing, because honestly, I could have exploded some of these scenes out.
Sure.
Even further, it would have been an 800-page book, and it would have cost $4,000 to ship to Australia. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but I just want to say once again, thank you to every single person out here in this chat. And I recognize many of these names, and I know they have the book. And those who don't have the book, buy the freaking book. I'm kidding. Those who don't have the book, the fact that you're here and you're listening to me, and you care about that stuff, that means a lot to me. I mean, you want to know the reason I wrote the book? It's exactly for reasons like this. Look, like anything else, the book costs money to make, and the time invested, but you don't write books to make money. Unless you're Stephen King, or you know what I mean, you're gonna sell 4 million books. I mean, when I was doing the Guitar World covers, they had those 3 covers, I put my address in there, and people would write to me, and they say, "Wow, we love your stories, and Edward," and I would receive those postcards, dude, and I would light up. It meant everything to me. It was hard for me to understand that process of going to a newsstand and buying a magazine that had a story of mine in it, and opening it in your house in Idaho, and you're reading that story that I wrote, and you're so moved by that you sit down and you write me a note. To me, that was the greatest form of respect. To me, that was just the greatest. And anybody who ever wrote me knows that I answered every single one of those people, every single person, because it was so important to them, and it was more important to me. So anyway, to answer your question, I wanted people to be blown away, of course, and love my book and be passionate about it. And I wanted to hear from them, and their comments mean everything to me. And yeah, maybe that's why I wrote it, because I wanted to hear people saying, "We love your book." I wanted to be fed in that way. It was important to me. Sure. I think it's important to anybody, but I think that was a huge part of it, actually.
And like I say, if you didn't do it, somebody else would have done it. And there are, like say, a few other books out there that are good books, but it's that inside knowledge. You literally have the tapes. The book was there, just in a different form, because you were doing, like say, interviews, articles that are a much shorter thing. And it's nice. Yeah, let's hear the rest of the story in many ways, right? Because I'm sure there was some heavy editing to do an article, because you only have so much column space. And
well, that's exactly right. And in some of those interviews, I printed, I specifically printed my first interview with Ed, which was a phoner, and the second interview, which was the first time he came over to my place on Weepaw Way. And yes, those versions, as they originally appeared, were edited down. Not a lot, but there were some bits missing. And so those 2 interviews specifically, I printed in full. And also, I think I did that with the 3 Guitar World stories. Hard to remember, but yeah, there were a lot of bits that ended up on the cutting room floor. Bits that I left out originally. They were never even sent to the magazines. I just cut that stuff out, and I included that stuff. So there was a lot of that went on. In fact, what I did originally, and I know we got to probably get this wrapped up here. I wanted the transcripts to be so verbatim that I included originally every time Edward would go, and he did that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So the first iteration of the book, there's I began playing I'm just making up stuff. I began playing a Fender when I was 13, and I put and my response a lot of times would be uh-huh, and I would put that as my in the QA. And after I had done all of that, I looked at it, I go, oh my God, I can't have this. One, it made the book so long because it goes so I had to go back with my art director, Daniel Gray, who did a fantastic job. He also did, Niels Lozauer has a new book called Ed by Lowe's, I think it is.
Yes.
His photographs, which is just amazing book. Daniel did the art direction for that. We went back and we took out every so yeah. So I mean, I went a bit crazy, but we took all that stuff out. But but the transcripts are infinitely more complete than what you've read in the magazines for sure. Yeah, Ed loved that word for sure, Keith.
Yeah.
In
there.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking back the first time I did a radio interview, and I was just like thinking to myself, don't pause, don't stammer, don't. And that was what it was. You got a show coming up? Friday. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why we're not professional orders. We stick to the guitar mostly, folks. Nice.
So we good here?
Well, yeah, I think we definitely covered it. Thank you, Terry, for putting the links in the chat to find Steve's book. The best way is definitely paypal.me/Tonechaser.
Tonechaser with a capital T. Though probably doesn't matter. That's okay, man. Yeah, and again, if I can be a salesman for just a second. Yeah, again, it's $47 and include your address. And as many times as I say that, people forget to put their address in PayPal. They think it's in there automatically. It's not. So what happens is people will send in the payment and it'll be $47. I know it's for the book and there's no address. So PayPal provides a thing, I think it says message buyer. So I've got to go into PayPal and say, hey, send me your freaking address or I'm going to keep your money and not send you a book. I don't say it. But, then I have to send them a message. And a lot of times what happens is that PayPal won't get back to me and say, oh, this is your second message, or that they received your message. Here's a response. So I don't know when or if that person has responded to my request for an address. So I've got to remember, oh, Bill Smith sent me the money and I sent him a request to get his address. I got to go to my PayPal site and find it. So it becomes a thing. And so there have been a couple books totally accidentally that I've missed, or maybe someone sent the address back and I forgot to look, and someone will say, hey man, I sent you the payment 8 months ago, where's my book? Or and of course I'll look and I'll realize what happened and the book gets sent immediately. But so don't forget your address and don't forget to send as family and friends. PayPal doesn't need any more of your money or my money. Right?
They're rich enough.
Absolutely.
We need the money. We're starving artists, folks. Yes, I'll see you tomorrow, Mark. Getting together tomorrow. Awesome. Yes, well, this has definitely been a great time. You're more than welcome back anytime, Steve. This has definitely been wonderful. I enjoy the stories and talk about anything. I'm sure we barely scratched. That's just one artist we just scratched on tonight. Yeah. You mentioned a few others that I'm like, yeah, I like him. Yep, I like him. Yep. And we could talk about all that stuff.
Yeah, man, I got some good stories. I think what would be interesting, Ben, is man, if you want to get the book, you know, read it or read some of it, and then,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? It'll,
Yeah,
we can dive a bit deeper and, I think it just, it'd be a lot more, more fun, more interesting.
I
Um,
agree.
I can remember a few times through no fault of my own, and I'll be quick with this. I remember once vividly, um, uh, I was doing a story on Jethro Tull for, it was a magazine called Circus Raves. There was Circus and Circus Raves. Circus Raves was like you know, the inferior little sister to Circus. But they sent me out on the road to do an interview with Ian Anderson. I was a huge Tull fan. I love Tull. This is the Minstrel and the Gallery tour, and the record wasn't out yet, so I had nothing to listen to. So I sit down with Ian Anderson. So he goes, "Well, did you listen to the record?" I go, "Well, no, man. I'm very obliged. I said, no, there was no record. There was nothing to listen to." And he got, oh my God, he got irate. And I'm thinking, oh my God, how could he not know that? Or how could the public, goes, well, go listen to the record. I don't have a record, man. He goes, oh, he had a cassette. This is the days of cassettes. Anyway, he gave me a cassette. So I went back to my room at the hotel, in an hour, listened to it, trying to take notes and walk back in there and trying to appear halfway
Sure.
knowledgeable. But that was a nightmare, and that happened a fair amount because when I was interviewing these bands, a lot of these bands were just coming out with their first records. So a lot of
Right.
times there would just be a test pressing, what we call a white label. There's no actual label; it's just a white test pressing label. Um, uh, so sometimes I'd have access to that. Sometimes it'd be before there was even a test pressing. So there'd be nothing to listen to. So you'd have to talk to a band, um, sight unseen, as it were.
Sure.
But anyway, yeah. So man, a little knowledge can be dangerous. So yeah,
Definitely.
man, check out the
Definitely.
book.
Well, yeah, I'm definitely picking up my copy of the book. That's for sure. And
Yeah, cool,
so
man. Cool.
so definitely hold on the line here. And thanks everybody that tuned in tonight. I do appreciate it. A special shout out to my mod squad for putting the links in the chats and stuff. And special thanks to anybody that contributed to the show tonight. That helps. That's going towards the book. The super chats tonight cover the book. Perfect. So awesome to see everybody. I'll be back tomorrow night with Terry and Trev with Canucks with Guitars, more live Q&A action, and then special guest Keith Campbell on my NASCAR podcast Tuesday night. Yes, that's going to be fun. Thanks everybody that tuned in. Again, hold those doors open. Let that guy in ahead of you in traffic. Do good things and good things will happen to you. Why? Karma is real. So be good to each other. Be well. Happy tone chasing. And of course, don't litter. Don't litter.